Hello and welcome back to another Camel's Hump Middle School video tutorial. On today's episode we're going to be talking about Tinkercad Basics. This tutorial assumes that you have run Tinkercad before and know most of what we're going to cover today, and this is intended to be a refresher course. So let's begin with some basic mouse and workplane navigation tools. When I move my mouse around with a right click and drag, I'm going to be able to change the view orientation of my screen. The scrolling wheel is going to allow me to zoom in and out. And if I use the scrolling wheel as a button and press the scrolling wheel, I'm going to be able to pan left and right. I can always get back to my home view if I get confused as to what I'm looking at by pressing the home button right here, and it's going to bring me right back. You can also navigate the Tinkercad view by clicking and dragging with your left click the box up here. I prefer the right click out here, but that's completely up to you. I'm going to click home to get myself back. So that's viewing the workplane. Let's talk about some basic shapes. We're going to bring a box out. I can left click and drag any of the white squares that appear to change the size of my box. I can make it grow taller. I can also change my view a little bit to gain different access points to my box so I can edit different faces of it. I can grab this arrow up here to levitate my object, and here's an important thing to remember. Anytime an object is levitating, if I want to glue it back down to the work plane, I simply select the object and press D on the keyboard. That's an important tool to remember. Now, when it comes to entering specific dimensions for an object, rather than trying to drag something into a specific spot, we can click these white buttons and lock these measurement numbers, dimensions, into place, and we can actually click those and we can type precisely what we want this box to be. So I'm aiming for a 50 by 50 by 50 box. Okay, there we go. Now let's talk about simple operations of punching holes and things. Okay, so I'm going to bring a cylinder out. My goal is to punch a cylindrical hole through this box. First thing that needs to be true is the cylinder needs to be at least as tall as this box, if not taller. If it's only this tall and I turn it into a hole, I'm going to end up with a cylindrical hole inserted into the bottom of my box, but it's not going to stretch through the top. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure, whoops, I'm going to press D to get this down again. I'm going to make sure that this box is at least as, whoops, I did it again, at least as tall, if not taller than the box over here. I'm going to turn it into a hole with my menu over here. Okay. Now, yes, you do have a cylindrical hole tool over here, but I would just forget that these exist, right? Because any of these shapes can be turned into holes simply by using the menu over here. All right, now I'm going to get one more tool involved here because I want the cylinder to be precisely in the middle of my box. So I'm going to introduce or reintroduce you to the alignment tool. To use it, I'm going to drag around both of my objects by selecting them both. I'm going to come up here to my alignment tool. I'm going to align it to the center on the x-axis and the center on the y-axis. Okay. Now, it's not a complete whole until I group it. Remember that? Grouping is an important piece. Right now I have two unique objects. I need to make these one unique object. So I'm going to select them both again, and I'm going to come up here and group. Grouping is going to finalize that process, and now I've got a hole in my cube. Okay. Example number 1. Example number 2. You may remember from times past in my classroom building a teacup. I'm going to go through a teacup building exercise with you, and that will get us to the finish line for this example. The one thing I want you to really start to think about with Tinkercad is the potential for these shapes over here to do more than what they appear as in the menu. So a cylinder, for example, can be so much more than a cylinder, and we're about to find out. Okay? Now, one thing that you're going to want to remember too is when I start to stretch and drag things, I'm going to change the aspect ratio of them, which is to say my circular cylinder, if I'm not careful, is going to turn into an oval. Okay? One very easy way of making sure that doesn't happen if I want to enlarge things is I click and drag, press Shift. Shift, click, drag, and I've got a perfectly circular cylinder. Now, the thing is though, right now I've got a big cylinder, it kind of looks like a silo on a farm. I want to make this the base of a teacup. So I'm going to shrink this down and make it a little pancake. All right. So already the potential of this shape is being realized into something completely different over here. Alright, so that's the beginning of my teacup. Next step, I actually need a teacup out here, and I'm going to begin with a paraboloid shape. I'm going to drag that out. That's not a very big teacup, so I'm going to shift, click, and drag again. And then with this object still selected, I'm going to come up here and use my flip tool, and I'm going to turn this upside down. Alright? In your mind's eye, I want you to start imagining what I'm going to do next. This needs to get onto the middle of this. Now, there's two ways of doing it. There's an easy way and a hard way. The hard way is dragging it and trying your best to get it centered on here. Now, the easy way, let's use tools. Select them both. Click the Align tool. Align on the X, align on the Y. Last step for this, anytime you move something and you're satisfied with its final location, go ahead and group it. That way, when we start introducing new things to this object, I'm not going to start moving things I don't want to move. So that is all set. Do we like that? I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, another tool to refresh yourselves on is the work plane tool. Right now my work plane is down here underneath my cup. I want to set my work plane up on top of my cup. And by moving my work plane, what that means is any object you drag out of the menu is going to land on the work plane. So if we were to say, by clicking the work plane tool, and setting the work plane up on top, that means that any new shape is going to end up here now, not way down here. And what I want to do is, this next step, I want to carve the hole out of my teacup. So I'm going to take a paraboloid tool again, bring it back out, shift, click, and drag it a little bit larger. With it still selected, we need to flip this upside down. And using your mind's eye, what needs to happen to this tool? Well, if I were to center this on the cup and drop it in, that's not going to be much of a hollow teacup, so I'm going to turn this into a hole. Okay. Now my work plane has served its purpose, so I'm going to click work plane, I'm going to put it back down to the bottom again. That's an important thing to remember to do. When you're done with a moved work plane, always reset it back down into the blue zone down here. It's just, visually, it's a lot easier to see what you're doing with that out of the way. Now, again, I could drag this into the middle, trying my best to get it centered, but let's use the tools. Just select both, Align tool, align, align. You're all set. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit. We're going to select this. I'm going to drop this down into the teacup. I like that. I'm going to group this to finalize that. And now I've got myself beginning of a teacup. But the teacup's missing an important piece. And what is that piece, do you think? Well, I think it's a handle. Okay, I want to run you through a kind of an interesting example of that conversation we were having about the potential of shapes on how to build a handle. Now, my idea for this teacup is I want to build kind of like a chalice, like a trophy type teacup with a handle over here and then a handle over here. Right? Two handle teacup. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by moving this over here kind of out of the way. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to grab onto a heart. Right? Now the heart's going to end up on the bottom work plane, and that's fine because that's where I've set it. And I'm going to shift and click and make this a little bigger. That's probably good. And then I'm going to, while it's selected, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste another one. And I'm going to take this one and shift and click and make it a little smaller. Okay? But here's the deal. I'm going to use this little heart as a hole to carve out the center of this heart. So I'm going to turn this into a hole. And we want to check the height because it needs to be at least as tall as the other one to punch through the center of it. Now I'm going to use the alignment tool again. So you'll notice I'm using the alignment tool a ton. Okay? There's no need to kind of drag things all over the place if you want them in the middle of something. The alignment tool is a great tool. Finalizing this hole, I'm going to group it. Now, speaking of using things as the potential of shapes, I'm going to consider a box. I'm going to consider this box an eraser at this point. So I'm going to drag out a box, turn it into a hole, make sure that it's tall enough, and check this out. I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard, and I'm going to march this box right over onto my heart and leave it right there. Now I'm going to select both of these and group them. And look at that. From a single heart, I now have a pretty nice looking handle. I need another one, so I'm going to shift and click, or I'm going to click rather, and copy and paste. I'm going to drag this one out of the way, use my flip tool, turn it around. Now I've got both sets of my handles. Okay? I need to click on this one and upright it, so I'm going to use my arrow tool. Remember, watch my mouse. If it's inside this compass, I'm going to snap to 22.5 degree increments, which means 90, 67.5, 45, and so on. If I come outside the compass, I get singular degree increments, which is useful if you need them, but really, if you don't need incremental or individual degrees, stay inside the compass and snap to these preset dimensions. They're going to do you a favor. So I'm going to rotate this one up as well to 90. Now, I need to lift these both up to a particular height. So I'm going to go up to 10. I'm going to go up to the same height over here, up to 10. And check this out. I'm going to align one more time. But I'm only going to align to one axis this time, and it's going to be this one. So now what I can do is I can take this handle, and using the arrow keys on my keyboard, I can move it into and through the whole cup over here. Right? Because it's aligned on that center line, they're going to be exactly where I need them. I'm just going to do this overhead. Now this is not done because now I need to take a view of this and realize, okay, these are going to need to be rotated a little bit. So I'm now going to use individual increment degrees, and I'm going to come over to 10 degrees. I'm going to match it with this one. Come over to 10 degrees. And now I'm going to march this one into the cup. I might increase my degree to, I'm going to go an additional 10 degrees, so a total of 20. Whoops, that ended up being 11. So I'm going to come over here and do that, match it at 11. Okay. I'm going to march this one back over, march this one back over, and now I've got a two-handle teacup. But here's the deal. Look at that. See that little handle part right there? And I can actually bring this one in to show me the same thing. So, how do I get rid of those? So I know I have a grouped object right here with a hole in the middle of it. So say I selected this whole thing and ungrouped it. So now I have my handles with the half of the heart and the teacup grouped. Now, if I group this as it is right now, what do you think it's going to look like? Let's find out. I select it all and I group it. That is not what I'm going for, is it? So the order of events in Tinkercad is very, very important to us. So we're going to cover how to chop those out in the next tutorial. But I just wanted to give you an idea that sometimes if you try to go backwards in Tinkercad, you don't exactly get what you thought you were going to get. But that should keep you busy with the refresher on getting you started on getting back into Tinkercad. Take the next 20 minutes or so to play with Tinkercad. I want you to use the alignment tool, I want you to use the flip tool, and I want you to group and ungroup things using the holes. Okay, enjoy.